The morning sun cast long shadows through the crystal windows of the Whitmore mansion, illuminating dust motes that danced above the Persian rug. Eleanor Whitmore sat rigidly at her vanity, watching as her lady's maid pulled and twisted her golden hair into an elaborate coiffure that made her scalp ache. In the mirror, she could see her mother hovering behind, adjusting the pearl necklace that had been in the family for 3 generations. "Remember, Eleanor," her mother said, her voice as sharp as the hairpins being driven into Eleanor's skull. "Mr. Cornelius Ashford will be calling this afternoon. You must be at your most charming. This match will secure our family's position for generations to come." Eleanor's stomach churned at the thought of Cornelius Ashford, a man 30 years her senior with cold gray eyes and breath that smelled of cigars and brandy. She had met him only twice at society gatherings, both times feeling his gaze crawling over her like spiders on her skin. But her father had gambling debts, and the Ashford fortune would solve everything. She was merely the currency of exchange. "Yes, Mother," she murmured, her fingers unconsciously crumpling the lace handkerchief in her lap. The Whitmore mansion stood proudly on Beacon Hill in Boston, a testament to old money and older traditions. Every room dripped with opulence: Italian marble, French tapestries, furniture that cost more than most families saw in a lifetime. Yet, to Eleanor, each gilded frame and crystal chandelier felt like the bars of an ornate cage. After her mother swept from the room, Eleanor dismissed her maid and moved to the window. Below, the cobblestone streets bustled with carriages and well-dressed pedestrians going about their morning routines. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, wondering if any of them felt as trapped as she did. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her younger sister Charlotte slipped inside, closing the door carefully behind her. "I've brought you something," Charlotte whispered, producing a folded newspaper from beneath her shawl. "I thought you might find the advertisements amusing." Eleanor took the paper, the Boston Daily Advertiser, and smiled at her sister's small rebellion. Their father forbade them from reading newspapers, claiming it filled young ladies' heads with unnecessary ideas. She unfolded it carefully, skimming past news of railroad expansions and political scandals until her eyes caught on a small advertisement in the back pages. "Respectable rancher seeks bride. Man of 28 years. Owner of 500 acres in Montana Territory. Seeks honest woman of good character for matrimony. Must be willing to work hard and embrace frontier life. No fortune required. Only genuine heart. Those interested please write to James Mackenzie, Copper Creek, Montana Territory." Eleanor read it 3 times, her heart beating faster with each pass. Montana Territory. She had seen illustrations in books: vast open skies, mountains that touched the clouds, endless grasslands where a person could ride for days without seeing another soul. The complete opposite of her suffocating world. "What has captured your attention so?" Charlotte asked, peering over her shoulder. Eleanor showed her the advertisement. Charlotte's eyes widened. "You cannot be serious." She breathed. "Why not?" Eleanor asked, though she had been thinking the same thing. "This James Mackenzie asks for no dowry, no family connections, only an honest heart and willingness to work. But Eleanor, you know nothing of this man. He could be anybody, a criminal, a madman, or he could be my escape," Eleanor said softly. She thought of Cornelius Ashford's clammy hands and possessive smile. Is the devil you don't know not sometimes better than the one you do? The idea took root in her mind like a stubborn weed. Over the following days, as her mother paraded her before Cornelius Ashford, as wedding preparations began without her input, Eleanor found herself composing letters in her head to a stranger in Montana. The breaking point came a week later. Cornelius had cornered her in the conservatory during a garden party, pressing too close, his hand heavy on her waist as he spoke of their future together. He mentioned casually how he would need to train her properly once they were wed, how young brides needed a firm hand to guide them. The predatory gleam in his eyes made her skin crawl. That night, Eleanor made her decision. She penned a brief letter to James Mackenzie, introducing herself simply as Miss E. White. close enough to her real name but different enough to avoid detection. She wrote of her desire for honest work and simple living, of her good health and education. She mentioned nothing of her family's wealth or her current circumstances. Posting the letter required bribing a housemaid, but within 3 weeks, a response arrived. James Mackenzie's handwriting was bold but careful, his words straightforward. "Miss White, I am pleased by your letter. Life here is not easy, but it is honest. I offer no luxury, but I promise respect and partnership. If you are certain, I will send funds for passage. The choice is yours." Eleanor stared at those words. The choice is yours. When had anyone ever given her a choice? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of secret preparations. She slowly gathered what money she could, sold a few pieces of jewelry her grandmother had given her directly. She studied train schedules and routes west. Charlotte, though terrified for her, helped by providing alibis when Eleanor needed to venture out. The night of her escape arrived sooner than expected. Her parents announced that the wedding to Cornelius would take place in just 1 month. That very evening, while the household slept, Eleanor dressed in her plainest traveling dress, still far too fine for where she was going, and packed a single carpet bag with practical clothes she had secretly purchased. She left a letter on her pillow, knowing it would break her mother's heart, but seeing no other way. In it, she apologized but did not explain. Let them think what they would. Charlotte met her at the servants' entrance, tears streaming down her face. "Write to me," she whispered, pressing a small purse of coins into Eleanor's hands. "Use a false name, but write to me." "I will," Eleanor promised, embracing her sister one last time. The walk to the train station in the pre-dawn darkness felt like crossing into another world. Every shadow might hide someone sent to drag her back, but she made it, purchasing a ticket with trembling hands. As the train pulled away from Boston, Eleanor pressed her face to the window, watching her old life disappear into the morning mist. The journey west was nothing like the comfortable carriages she had known. She changed trains in Chicago, then again in Omaha. The further west she traveled, the rougher the conditions became. Well-dressed Eastern passengers gave way to farmers, miners, and families seeking new starts. Her fine dress drew stares and whispers. In Omaha, she used precious funds to purchase 2 simple calico dresses and a sturdy pair of boots. Days blended together, endless planes rolling past the window, stops at tiny stations that were little more than wooden platforms in the wilderness. Eleanor's body ached from the hard seats, and her meals consisted of whatever she could buy at station stops. But with each mile, she felt the weight of her old life lifting. The landscape transformed as they moved through Nebraska into Wyoming territory. Flat plains gave way to rolling hills, then distant mountains that grew larger each day. The sky seemed impossibly vast, stretching from horizon to horizon without a single building to break its sweep. Eleanor had never seen so much empty space, so much possibility. Fellow passengers shared stories of the frontier, tales of Indian raids, harsh winters, failed homesteads. A worn woman with 3 small children spoke of losing her husband to pneumonia their first winter in Dakota Territory. A grizzled prospector described men driven mad by isolation and failure. With each story, Eleanor felt a flutter of fear. What was she doing, trading her gilded cage for this uncertain wilderness? But then she would remember Cornelius Ashford's possessive eyes, her mother's calculating coldness, the endless suffocating rules of Boston society. Whatever lay ahead, she had chosen it. That alone made it worthwhile. The train reached the end of its line in Miles City, Montana Territory. Eleanor stepped onto the platform, her legs unsteady after days of travel. The town, if it could be called that, consisted of a single muddy main street lined with rough wooden buildings. The air smelled of dust, horses, and something wild she couldn't name. She had telegraphed ahead from the last major stop, and James Mackenzie had promised to meet her. Eleanor stood with her carpet bag, trying not to look as lost as she felt. Cowboys lounged against storefronts, eyeing her curiously. A woman in a gaudy dress and painted face smiled knowingly from a saloon doorway. "You must be Miss White. Eleanor turned to find a man approaching, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing worn leather chaps and a wide-brimmed hat. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of winter sky. Handsome, she admitted, but his expression was guarded, almost stern. "Mr. Mackenzie," she ventured. He nodded, studying her with those cool eyes. She saw his gaze take in her Eastern dress, plainer than what she had fled but still too fine for this place. His jaw tightened slightly. "We'll be married today," he said without preamble. "Judge travels through once a month. Next opportunity isn't for 4 weeks. Eleanor blinked at his brusqueness. Of course. I mean, yes." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she hadn't protested the haste. He picked up her carpetbag as if it weighed nothing. "This way," he said, already walking. Eleanor hurried to keep pace with his long strides, her new boots slipping in the muddy street. She had imagined many things about this moment, but not this cold efficiency. In his letters, James Mackenzie had seemed warmer somehow. But then, what had she expected? Romance? Poetry? This was a business arrangement. Nothing more. The courthouse was a simple wooden building that also served as the land office and post office. The judge, a harried-looking man with spectacles perched on his nose, performed the ceremony with the efficiency of someone who had done it countless times. 2 clerks served as witnesses, barely glancing up from their paperwork. "Do you take this woman?" the judge asked. "I do," James Mackenzie said, his voice steady. "Do you take this man?" Eleanor hesitated for just a moment, the weight of the moment crashing over her. She was marrying a complete stranger, in a wild land thousands of miles from home. Then she thought of the alternative, Cornelius Ashford and a lifetime of elegant captivity. "I do," she said. And just like that, she was no longer Eleanor Whitmore of Boston. She was Mrs. James Mackenzie of Copper Creek, Montana Territory. Her husband, the word felt foreign in her mind, placed a simple gold band on her finger. No diamonds, no elaborate ceremony, no reception with hundreds of guests. Just a plain ring and a firm handshake from the judge. Outside the courthouse, James helped her onto the wagon seat with surprising gentleness. "It's a full day's ride to the ranch," he said, climbing up beside her. "We'll stop at Henderson's trading post for supplies first." Eleanor nodded, unsure what to say. The man beside her was her husband, yet she knew almost nothing about him beyond what little he had shared in his letters. The reality of her situation began to sink in as the wagon rolled out of town, leaving even that rough civilization behind. The landscape that unfolded before them was both beautiful and terrifying. Endless grassland broken by distant purple mountains. A sky so vast it made her dizzy. No trees except for cottonwoods clustered along creek beds. No houses, no people. Just miles and miles of empty space. James Mackenzie drove in silence, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Eleanor stole glances at his profile. Strong jaw, sun-lined face, hands that gripped the reins with casual competence. He was handsome, she admitted again, but there was something closed off about him, a wall she couldn't see past, as the sun began its descent toward the mountain peaks, painting the grassland gold and crimson. Eleanor realized there was no turning back now. She had fled her gilded life for this, a silent stranger and an unknown future in a land that seemed to stretch on forever. The wedding ring felt heavy on her finger, a weight both frightening and oddly liberating. Whatever lay ahead, she had chosen it. Now she would have to live with the consequences of that choice. The wagon wheels creaked to a halt outside Henderson's trading post as the sun climbed higher in the vast Montana sky. Eleanor's bones ached from the constant jarring over rutted trails, but she kept her complaints silent, not wanting to appear weak before her new husband. "Wait here," James said curtly, wrapping the reins around the brake handle. Eleanor watched him stride into the weathered building, his movements efficient and purposeful. Through the dusty window, she could see him speaking with the proprietor, pointing at various goods. Several rough-looking men lounged on the porch, their eyes fixing on her with undisguised curiosity. Well, well, one of them drawled, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Mackenzie got himself a mail-order bride. Eleanor kept her gaze straight ahead, her mother's lessons in deportment serving her even here. Never acknowledge inappropriate attention, though her mother had surely never imagined this particular scenario. Pretty little thing, another added. Bet she don't last the winter. These eastern flowers wilt quick in Montana soil. Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks, but she maintained her composure. She had fled one kind of judgment only to face another. James emerged carrying supplies, his jaw tight. He loaded the wagon bed with practiced movements, sacks of flour and beans, coffee, salt pork, ammunition. The men on the porch fell silent under his cold stare. "Congratulations on your wedding, Mackenzie," the first man ventured, though his tone held mockery. "Thompson," James acknowledged with a curt nod, helping Eleanor down from the wagon seat. "Ma'am needs some supplies. Mrs. Henderson will assist her." He pressed coins into Eleanor's palm, his fingers calloused and warm. "Get what you need. Practical things." Inside the trading post, Eleanor found herself overwhelmed by the jumble of goods, everything from plow blades to penny candy crammed onto rough shelves. Mrs. Henderson, a stout woman with kind eyes but a knowing smile, approached. "You're the new Mrs. Mackenzie," she said. It wasn't a question. "Come from back east." "Boston," Eleanor admitted. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. "Long way from home. Let's get you properly outfitted." Under the woman's guidance, Eleanor purchased sturdy cotton undergarments, wool stockings, a simple bonnet to protect against the sun, and basic toiletries. Mrs. Henderson added a cake of rough lye soap, needles and thread, and a worn copy of The Prairie Housewife's Companion. "You'll be needing this," she said, patting the book. "Ranch life ain't nothing like Boston, dear." Eleanor nodded, feeling increasingly out of her depth. At the counter, she noticed the men from the porch had followed them inside, pretending to examine merchandise while stealing glances her way. Their whispers carried clearly. "Mackenzie must be desperate. Advertising for a bride? After what happened with Mary? Shh, he'll hear you." Mary? Eleanor filed the name away. Another mystery about her taciturn husband. Outside. James loaded her purchases without comment. As they left the settlement behind, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of being a spectacle, a source of entertainment for the frontier gossips. The wedding ring on her finger felt heavier with each mile. The journey continued in silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and the distant cry of hawks. The landscape rolled endlessly, golden grass rippling like an inland sea. Punctuated by outcroppings of red rock and scattered cattle, Eleanor had never imagined such emptiness, such space. In Boston, one couldn't walk 10 feet without encountering another person. Here, they traveled for hours without seeing a single soul. As afternoon shadows lengthened, James finally spoke. "Ranch is just over that rise." Eleanor straightened, eager to see her new home despite her apprehension. They crested the hill, and her heart sank. The ranch consisted of a modest log cabin, a barn that had seen better days, and various outbuildings scattered across a dusty yard. Chickens pecked in the dirt, and a few horses stood in a corral. It was neat and well-maintained, but so far from anything she had known that the tears pricked her eyes. "It ain't much," James said, a defensive edge to his voice. "But it's solid built. I've got 500 acres, good water rights, and the cattle are thriving." "It's fine," Eleanor managed, swallowing her disappointment. What had she expected? A frontier mansion? As the wagon rolled into the yard, people emerged from various buildings. A weathered older man limped from the barn, a young Mexican boy at his heels. A middle-aged woman appeared on the cabin porch, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "That's Hank, my foreman," James explained, nodding toward the limping man. "The boy is Miguel, helps with the horses, and Mrs. Novak, the housekeeper." The small group gathered as James helped Eleanor down. She felt their assessment like a physical weight. Her too fine dress, her soft hands, her obvious Eastern breeding. Mrs. Novak's expression was particularly skeptical. "This is Eleanor," James said simply. "My wife." "Ma'am?" Hank touched his hat brim, but his eyes held doubt. Miguel stared openly until Mrs. Novak cuffed him gently. The woman herself stepped forward, her thick Czech accent coloring her words. "Welcome, Mrs. Mackenzie. You must be tired from journey." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, grateful for even this grudging courtesy. James carried her carpetbag inside, the others dispersing to their duties. The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, a kitchen area to one side. A ladder led to what she assumed was a loft bedroom. "Mrs. Novak stays in the cottage out back," James explained. "She cooks and keeps house. Hank and Miguel bunk in the barn loft." Eleanor nodded, trying to process this new life. In Boston, she'd had a dozen servants. Here, 3 people managed an entire ranch. "I'll show you the bedroom," James said, climbing the ladder with her bag. Eleanor followed awkwardly, her skirts hampering the climb. The loft was small but neat, a rope bed with a simple quilt, a washstand, a trunk for clothes. One tiny window overlooked the endless prairie. "I'll leave you to settle in," James said. "Supper's at 6. He descended quickly, leaving Eleanor alone in the space that was now her bedroom. Their bedroom, she corrected herself, noticing men's clothes hanging on pegs, boots lined against the wall. The reality of sharing this intimate space with a virtual stranger sent a flutter of panic through her chest. She unpacked slowly, her few dresses looking absurdly out of place beside James's work clothes. The silk ball gown she'd impulsively packed seemed particularly ridiculous. When would she ever wear such a thing here? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Novak stood at the ladder's top, arms full of linens. "I bring fresh sheets," she said, though the bed looked perfectly made. Eleanor suspected this was an excuse to satisfy curiosity. "Thank you," Eleanor said. "Mrs. Novak, may I ask you something?" The woman's expression grew guarded. "Yes?" "The men at the trading post mentioned someone named Mary." "Mrs. Novak's face closed completely. "It's not my place to speak of such things. You must ask husband." She departed quickly, leaving Eleanor with more questions than answers. Supper was a strained affair. The 4 ranch residents gathered in the main room, eating Mrs. Novak's hearty stew in relative silence. Eleanor felt keenly her inability to contribute. She had never cooked a meal in her life. The men discussed ranch business, using terms she didn't understand. When she asked a question about cattle branding, Hank and Miguel exchanged glances. "Begging your pardon, ma'am," Hank said, "but perhaps such talk ain't fitting for a lady's ears." "I should like to learn," Eleanor said firmly. "If this is to be my home, I want to understand the work." Another exchange of glances. James studied her with those unreadable eyes. "We'll see," was all he said. After supper, the hands retired to the barn. Mrs. Novak cleaned up with efficient movements, declining Eleanor's awkward offers of help. "You not know this work," she said, not unkindly but matter-of-factly. "Better you rest." Left with nothing to do, Eleanor sat by the fire while James worked on ledgers at the table. The silence stretched uncomfortably. In Boston, evenings meant conversation, music, entertainment. Here, there was only the pop of burning wood and the scratch of James's pen. "I should retire," she finally said. James looked up. "I'll be up later. Ranch work starts early. You'll hear us at dawn, but no need for you to rise." Eleanor climbed to the loft, changed into her nightgown behind the makeshift curtain of a hanging blanket. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds, wind rattling the windows, coyotes howling in the distance, the creak of the cabin settling. Hours later, she heard James climb the ladder. He moved quietly in the darkness, trying not to wake her, though she was far from sleep. The bed dipped as he settled on the far edge, maintaining careful distance. They lay there, two strangers sharing a marriage bed, the space between them feeling vast as the prairie outside. Eleanor thought of her wedding night fears, the warnings her married friends had whispered, the duties she would have to endure. But James made no move toward her, his breathing eventually evening into sleep. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or rejected. Dawn came too soon, announced by the crow of a rooster and the sound of men's voices in the yard. Eleanor peered out the tiny window to see James already up and working, moving among the cattle with easy competence. When had he risen? She hadn't even felt him leave the bed. She dressed quickly and descended to find Mrs. Novak already at work, the kitchen filled with the smell of coffee and biscuits. "Good morning," Eleanor offered. "Mrs. Novak nodded. "Men already eat and go. I save food for you." Eleanor sat at the rough table, eating mechanically. The biscuits were good but heavy, the coffee bitter and strong. Through the window, she watched the ranch work, men on horseback driving cattle, the constant motion and purpose. Everyone had a role except her. "Mrs. Novak," she ventured. "Might you teach me to cook?" The woman turned, surprise flickering across her stern features. "You not know cooking?" "I know, but I want to learn. To be useful." Mrs. Novak studied her for a long moment. "Is hard work, dirty work, not for ladies' soft hands." "My hands will toughen," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. A small smile tugged at the housekeeper's mouth. "Perhaps you not so delicate as you look." "Very well. We start with bread." The morning passed in a blur of flour and failure. Eleanor's first attempt at kneading resulted in a sticky mess. Her second was too dry. "Mrs. Novak corrected with patient firmness, her work-worn hands guiding Eleanor's clumsy efforts. "In old country," the woman said as they worked. "I learned from my mother, she from hers. Hands remember what mind forgets." By noon, Eleanor had produced a passable loaf, though her arms ached and flour coated every surface, including herself. When the men came in for the midday meal, she felt a small pride at serving bread she had made, even if it was heavy as a stone. Hank bit into a piece, chewing thoughtfully. "Well," he said finally, "it's bread, sure enough." Miguel stifled a laugh, earning another cuff from Mrs. Novak. James said nothing, but Eleanor caught him feeding his portion to the dog when he thought no one was looking. That afternoon, while the men returned to work, Eleanor explored her new domain. The ranch stretched endlessly, the buildings small islands in a sea of grass. She found a kitchen garden behind the cabin, withered by summer heat. The chicken coop needed repair. Everything spoke of hard use and making do. At the barn, she discovered Miguel brushing a gentle mare. "She's beautiful," Eleanor said. The boy jumped, then smiled shyly. "See, yes, her name is Dulcie. Sweet." "Might I pet her?" Miguel showed her how to approach slowly. Let the horse catch her scent. Dulcie's coat was warm velvet under Eleanor's palm. "You ride, Senora?" Miguel asked. "Only side saddle, in parks," Eleanor admitted. "Not real riding." The boy's expression suggested this didn't count as riding at all. As sunset approached, Eleanor helped Mrs. Novak prepare supper, her clumsy efforts more hindrance than help. The men ate her lumpy gravy without comment, though she noticed they used extra salt. That night, lying again beside her silent husband, Eleanor reflected on her first full day as a rancher's wife. Everything was harder than she had imagined. The work, the isolation, the constant sense of being judged and found wanting. The townspeople's whispers echoed in her mind. "Mail-order bride? Won't last the winter?" In the darkness, James shifted slightly. "You did well today," he said quietly, surprising her. Learning the bread, before she could respond, his breathing deepened into sleep. It was the first kind word he had offered, and Eleanor held it close like a small flame against the vast, dark uncertainty of her new life. Outside, coyotes howled at the moon, and the wind whispered secrets through the grass. Eleanor closed her eyes, wondering what tomorrow would bring, whether she had the strength to meet it. She had fled her gilded cage, But the freedom she sought seemed as distant as the stars scattered across the endless Montana sky. The weeks that followed blurred into a harsh rhythm of failure and small victories. Eleanor's hands, once soft as silk, developed blisters that burst and reformed into calluses. Her attempts at ranch work drew barely concealed amusement from the hands and thinly veiled frustration from her husband. The morning she tried to gather eggs, the rooster attacked, leaving her with torn skirts and wounded pride. When she attempted to milk the cow, the creature kicked over the pail, sending precious milk streaming across the barn floor. Hank found her there, near tears, trying to soak up the mess with her petticoat. "Ain't no shame in not knowing," the old foreman said gently, "but there might be shame in not learning." So Eleanor learned, slowly and painfully. Mrs. Novak taught her to cook simple meals, though her biscuits remained heavy and her stews often scorched. Miguel showed her how to approach the animals without startling them. Even Hank, despite his initial skepticism, demonstrated how to check cattle for signs of sickness. James remained distant, speaking mainly of practical matters. He rose before dawn and often returned after dark, exhausted from the endless work of running the ranch. Their conversations consisted of necessary exchanges. Pass the salt. Storm's coming. Need anything from town? At night, they maintained that careful distance in their shared bed. Two strangers bound by law but not affection. Eleanor often lay awake listening to the wind howl across the empty plains, feeling more alone than she ever had in Boston's crowded streets. The isolation pressed on her like a physical weight. Days passed without seeing anyone beyond the ranch's small population. No callers, no society, no conversation beyond the price of cattle and the threat of early snow. She wrote letters to Charlotte but had no way to post them. Town was a day's ride away, and James went only when absolutely necessary. One afternoon, while struggling to patch a torn shirt, another skill she'd never needed in her former life, Eleanor heard horses approaching. She hurried to the window, pathetically eager for any break in the monotony. 3 women rode into the yard, their divided skirts and confident postures marking them as true frontier women, Mrs. Novak emerged from the root cellar, her usual stern expression softening into something approaching warmth. "The Bannister sisters," she told Eleanor, "from Double B Ranch, 5 miles north." Eleanor hastily smoothed her hair and stepped onto the porch. The women dismounted with easy grace, all 3 tall and sun-browned, with direct gazes that reminded her uncomfortably of her husband. "You must be the new Mrs. Mackenzie," the eldest said. She appeared to be about 30, with premature lines around her eyes from squinting against the prairie sun. "I'm Sarah Bannister. These are my sisters, Ruth and Alice." "Eleanor," she replied, acutely aware of her awkward curtsy, a Boston reflex that seemed absurd here. Ruth, the middle sister, smiled not unkindly. "We heard Mackenzie got himself a mail-order bride. Thought we'd come see if you needed anything." The youngest, Alice, was more direct. "Heard you were from Boston. Must be quite a change." "Please, come in," Eleanor offered, grateful for the company despite their obvious curiosity. "I'll make coffee." The sisters exchanged glances. "We'll help," Sarah said firmly. "In the kitchen." They moved with practiced efficiency, while Eleanor fumbled with the coffee pot. Alice kindly took over, showing her the proper amount of grounds to use. "Takes some getting used to," Ruth said. "We were raised on a ranch, but I remember when Sarah married Tom and had to learn to manage a household. Burnt more meals than she cooked that first year." "At least I never set the curtains on fire," Sarah retorted. "That was once," Ruth protested, and they all laughed. Even Eleanor, feeling a loosening in her chest she hadn't experienced since leaving Boston, over coffee and Eleanor's misshapen attempts at cookies. The sisters shared local gossip and ranch wisdom. They spoke of failed homesteads, harsh winters, the delicate balance of survival in this unforgiving land. "You'll want to get your garden going before the ground freezes," Sarah advised. "Mrs. Novak can help, but she's getting on in years. The work really needs younger hands." "I tried," Eleanor admitted. Everything I planted died. You're watering at the wrong time, Alice said simply. Early morning or evening, never in the heat of day. And this soil needs amendments, chicken droppings, if you can stand the smell. They talked until the sun slanted low, and Eleanor felt she'd learned more in one afternoon than in all her weeks of solitary struggle. As they prepared to leave, Sarah took her aside. "It's not easy being a ranch wife," she said quietly, "especially when you weren't raised to it. But James Mackenzie is a good man, for all his quiet ways. Give it time." Eleanor wanted to ask about Mary, about the shadows in her husband's eyes, but the words stuck in her throat. After they left, the cabin seemed emptier than ever. That evening at supper, she ventured, "The Bannister sisters called today?" James looked up sharply. "What did they want?" "To welcome me. They were very kind." He grunted and returned to his meal. But later, as they prepared for bed, he said, "The Bannisters are good people. Tom Bannister helped me get started when I first came here." It was the longest personal revelation he'd offered, and Eleanor treasured it like a gift. Days grew shorter as autumn advanced. The grass turned golden brown, and morning frost silvered the ground. Eleanor's garden, under Mrs. Novak's guidance and with the Bannister sisters' advice, managed to produce a small crop of potatoes and turnips before the first freeze. She had also, through sheer determination, learned to make edible bread and passable stew. Her hands grew rough but capable. She could now gather eggs without fearing the rooster. She'd learned to carry a stick and show no fear. The milk cow still eyed her suspiciously, but at least stopped kicking over the pail. Yet for all these small victories, she felt James's disapproval like a constant chill. He never criticized directly, but she caught his frowns when she struggled with tasks any ranch woman should know. Once, she overheard him talking to Hank. Should have known better than to advertise for a wife. "A man gets what he pays for." The words cut deep. That night, she lay rigid beside him, anger and hurt warring in her chest. She had given up everything to come here, was trying her best to adapt. What more did he want? One evening, a fierce wind rattled the cabin windows. James came in late from checking the cattle, his face grim. "Storm coming," he announced. "Could be a bad one. Need to move the stock to shelter." Through the night, Eleanor watched from the window as the men worked by lantern light, driving cattle into the barn and leeward side of outbuildings. The wind grew to a howl, and the first snow began to fall, not the gentle flakes of Boston winters, but hard, driving pellets that stung exposed skin. By morning, the world had transformed. Snowdrifts reached halfway up the cabin door. The temperature plummeted until the water bucket by the stove froze solid. "Early blizzard, Mrs. Novak said grimly. "Will be hard winter." For 3 days, the storm raged. James and Hank fought through the snow to feed the animals. Returning half-frozen, Eleanor helped Mrs. Novak keep the fire going, melt snow for water, stretch their food supplies. The cabin became a small, warm island in a sea of killing white. On the third night, James collapsed by the fire, exhausted. Eleanor brought him hot coffee laced with the whiskey kept for medicinal purposes. His hands shook as he took it. "Lost 2 calves," he said dully. "Couldn't find them in time." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, meaning it. She was beginning to understand that each animal lost meant less income, less security. He looked at her then, really looked at her, seeming surprised by her genuine sympathy. "It happens," he said, "but it never gets easier." For a moment, the wall between them thinned. She saw not the cold stranger she'd married, but a man fighting to build something in a land that fought back. Then the moment passed, and he turned back to the fire. The storm finally broke, leaving behind a glittering white landscape that hurt to look at. The men dug paths to the barn and outbuildings. Eleanor, despite protests, helped clear snow from the chicken coop roof before it collapsed. "You'll catch your death," Mrs. Novak scolded. But Eleanor detected approval beneath the words. That evening, Neighbors began arriving, ranchers checking on each other after the storm. The Bannister sisters came, along with their brother Tom and several other families Eleanor hadn't met. They crowded into the cabin, sharing news of losses and survival. Henderson lost his whole hen house. Tom Bannister reported, "Roof caved in. We're taking them a few laying hens to get them started again." This was frontier community. Eleanor realized, people who might gossip and judge, but who also showed up when needed. She served coffee and what food they had, moving among the crowd with growing confidence. "Your wife's settling in well." She overheard Tom tell James, "She's trying," James replied, which from him seemed like high praise. As the gathering broke up, Sarah Bannister pressed a small package into Eleanor's hands. "Seeds for spring," she said. "Hardy varieties that do well here, and a little needlework to pass the winter evenings." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. "Thank you. We look after each other out here," Sarah said simply. "It's the only way to survive." That night, as she and James lay in their usual separate silence, Eleanor found courage to speak. "I know I'm not what you expected," she said to the darkness. "I know I'm clumsy and ignorant about ranch life, but I'm trying. I left everything I knew to come here." For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, why? The simple question held genuine curiosity, the first he'd shown about her past. "I was trapped," she said carefully. "My family had chosen a husband for me. A man who saw me as a possession, not a person. I hoped that here I could find something different." Another long silence. "And have you?" Eleanor considered. The work was hard, the isolation crushing, the comforts few. But she'd also found unexpected strengths, small victories, glimpses of community. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. James shifted slightly, not closer, but the rigid distance seemed to ease. "Fair enough," he said. It wasn't a declaration or promise, barely a concession. But lying there in the cold Montana night, with snow piled against the windows and coyotes howling in the distance, it felt like a beginning. The next morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Eleanor rose to help with breakfast, her movements in the kitchen more confident now. When James came in from the barn, she had hot coffee ready, strong and black as he liked it. "Thank you," he said, meeting her eyes briefly. She nodded, returning to the stove. Outside, the sun turned the snow-covered plains into a dazzling expanse of white. It was beautiful and terrible, this land that tested everyone who dared claim it. Eleanor thought of her mother's horror if she could see her now. Rough hands, simple clothes, cooking at a wood stove in a log cabin. The guilt had worn off her old life, but perhaps something stronger was being forged in its place. She was no longer a Boston lady playing at being a rancher's wife. She was becoming something new, shaped by wind and work and winter. Whether it would be enough, whether she would last the winter as the townspeople doubted, whether she and James would find their way to each other across the careful distance they maintained, remained to be seen. But for now, she would keep trying, keep learning, keep proving herself one small task at a time. The coffee was good this morning, not bitter as usual. James had noticed. She saw it in the slight surprise on his face. It was a tiny victory, but out here, tiny victories added up to survival. The storm arrived without warning on a late November evening. Eleanor had been mending harnesses in the barn, learning from Hank how to check for weak spots in the leather. When the temperature dropped so suddenly, her breath formed clouds in the air. "Temperature's falling fast," the old foreman observed. His weathered face creased with concern. "This ain't no ordinary cold snap." Within an hour, the wind rose to a shriek, driving snow horizontally across the ranch yard. James burst into the barn, ice already forming on his beard. "Blizzard coming hard," he shouted over the wind. "Need to get the stock secured now." What followed was a desperate battle against time and nature. Eleanor found herself pressed into service, holding lanterns while the men drove cattle into whatever shelter they could find. The wind tried to tear the light from her hands, and snow stung her face like needles. "The horses," Miguel called out in panic. "Some still in the far pasture." Without thinking, Eleanor grabbed a rope from the barn wall. "I'll help bring them in." "No!" James caught her arm. "You don't know the land well enough. You'll get lost." "Then tie the rope around my waist," she said firmly. "I can at least hold the gate and guide them in." He stared at her for a moment, then nodded curtly. As he secured the rope, his fingers briefly pressed against her waist, the most intimate touch they'd shared since their wedding day. Eleanor took her position at the gate, the rope her lifeline in the blinding snow. She could hear the men shouting, the frightened whinnying of horses, but could see nothing beyond a few feet. When the first horse materialized from the white wall of snow, she spread her arms, guiding it toward the barn. One by one they came, wild-eyed and ice-covered. "That's the last," James's voice came from somewhere in the storm. Eleanor turned to follow the rope back, but a fierce gust knocked her to her knees. For a terrifying moment, she lost all sense of direction. The rope in her hands was her only anchor to safety. She crawled along it, face down against the wind, until strong hands pulled her into the barn's shelter. "Crazy woman," James muttered, but his hands were gentle as he brushed snow from her face. "Could have been killed." "The horses are safe," she gasped through chattering teeth. "Hang the horses," he said roughly. "You think I care more about horses than—" He stopped abruptly, turning away. "Mrs." Novak appeared with blankets and hot coffee. As Eleanor warmed by the barn's small stove, she noticed James watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The blizzard raged for 2 days. The temperature plunged so low that nails in the cabin walls popped from the contracting wood. They moved all activities to the main room, clustering near the fireplace. Even with the fire roaring, ice formed on the inside of the windows. On the second night, with the wind howling like a living thing, Eleanor woke to find James's place empty. Fear stabbed through her. Had he gone out in the storm? She descended the ladder to find him stoking the fire, his movements restless. "Couldn't sleep," he said without looking at her. "Storm reminds me," he trailed off. But Eleanor waited, sensing this was important. "Finally," he continued, his voice barely audible over the wind. "3 winters ago, storm like this one. I was in town when it hit, couldn't get back for days. When I finally made it home," his hands clenched on the poker. "Mary had tried to get to the barn, check the animals, found her frozen halfway between the house and barn. The baby. The cold had taken him first." Eleanor's heart constricted. So this was the tragedy that had carved those lines around his eyes, built those walls around his heart. "James," she said softly. "She was a town girl, too," he continued harshly. "From Cheyenne. Thought she knew about winter, but Montana winter is different. I should have taught her better. Should have been here." "It wasn't your fault," Eleanor said. He turned on her then, eyes blazing. "Wasn't it? I brought her here, to this godforsaken place, just like I brought you." His voice dropped. "When I saw you heading out in that storm tonight, all I could think—" The words hung between them, unfinished but understood. Eleanor rose and moved closer, not touching but near enough to offer comfort. "I'm not Mary," she said quietly. "And you're teaching me. I'm learning." He studied her face in the firelight, her chapped lips, work-roughened hands, the determination in her eyes. Something shifted in his expression. "Yes," he said finally. "You are." When the storm finally broke, they emerged to a transformed world. Drifts reached the cabin's eaves in places. The barn door was completely blocked. It took hours of digging to reach the animals, but miraculously, they had lost only a few chickens. "Could have been much worse," Hank said, leaning on his shovel. As they worked to clear paths and check the stock, Eleanor noticed a change in how the men treated her. Her willingness to risk the storm had earned something, not quite acceptance, but respect. That evening, exhausted from the day's labor, she found James in the barn checking on a calf that had been weakened by the cold. "Will it survive?" she asked. "Maybe, if we can keep it warm and get it nursing again." He glanced at her, Want to help?" Together they worked to save the small life, Eleanor holding the calf while James coaxed it to take milk from a bottle. When it finally latched on and began to drink, they both smiled, a shared moment of victory. "You did well in the storm," James said quietly. "Brave, maybe too brave. My mother would say foolish." Eleanor replied, "Your mother never had to save horses in a blizzard," he countered. And was that almost a smile tugging at his lips? Over the following days, as they continued digging out from the storm, Eleanor felt a subtle shift in their relationship. James still maintained his reserve, but the rigid wall had developed cracks. He began teaching her things: how to read weather signs, judge the health of cattle, repair tack. "See how this cow's holding her head low?" he pointed out one afternoon. "Could mean she's feeling poorly. Need to watch for bloat." Eleanor absorbed every lesson, understanding that this knowledge might mean survival. She also began to understand her husband better, how his competence was hard-won, his silence often covering deep thought rather than coldness. One evening, she discovered him in the barn with Dulcie, the gentle mare. He was speaking softly to the horse, running his hands over her sides. "Is she ill?" Eleanor asked. "No, in foal. Come spring, we'll have a new edition." Eleanor approached slowly, as Miguel had taught her. James took her hand, the first time he'd voluntarily touched her, and placed it on the mare's side. "Feel there? That's the foal moving." Eleanor gasped at the flutter of life under her palm. "It's wonderful. Life goes on," James said, "even in this hard place, especially in this hard place." They stood together in the barn's warmth, hands touching through the mare's coat, and Eleanor felt something flutter in her own chest. Hope, perhaps, tentative as the life growing in Dulcie, but peace was short-lived on the frontier. A few days later, riders appeared on the horizon. Eleanor shaded her eyes, watching their approach with the wariness she'd learned. These weren't neighbors. Their pace was too urgent, their formation too deliberate. "James!" she called. He emerged from the barn, took one look, and his face hardened. "Get inside, now!" "But, Eleanor, please!" The please, so rare from him, sent her hurrying to the cabin. She watched from the window as 5 men rode into the yard. Their leader, a heavy-set man with cold eyes, didn't bother to dismount. "Mackenzie," he said, "heard you lost stock in the storm." "Some," James replied evenly. "As did everyone. Difference is, others can afford the loss. You're behind on your loan payment." Eleanor's stomach clenched. Loan payment? James had never mentioned financial troubles. "I'll have it by month's end," James said. The man, who Eleanor now recognized as Carl Morrison, the banker from town, smiled unpleasantly. "That's what you said last month. I'm a patient man, Mackenzie, but patience has limits. You've got 2 weeks. After that..." He glanced meaningfully at the cabin, the barn, the land stretching beyond. "Well, plenty of folks interested in this spread." After they left, Eleanor found James standing rigid by the corral, staring at nothing. "How much?" she asked quietly. $200, he said flatly. "Might as well be 2,000. Eleanor's mind raced. She had sold her jewelry before leaving Boston, but most had gone to travel expenses. "Still, I have $40, she said. "It's yours." He turned sharply. "No, I didn't bring you here to take your money. You brought me here to be your wife," she countered. "Wives share burdens." "Not this burden," he said harshly. "I knew Morrison wanted this land when I took the loan. Thought I could make it work, but the cattle prices dropped, then the storm. That night at supper, the usual quiet felt heavier, even Mrs. Novak seemed subdued. Hank finally spoke up. "Got $60 saved. It's yours if you need it." "And I have 20, Miguel added shyly. James's jaw worked. Eleanor could see how much accepting help cost him. "That's half," she said practically. "We can find the rest." "How?" James demanded. "Can't sell cattle. Prices are too low. Horses need to stay for spring work. The Bannister sisters mentioned the army fort buys supplies. Eleanor said, I could take in washing, mending. No wife of mine will take in washing, James said flatly. Then what? Eleanor's own temper flared. Would you rather lose everything out of pride? They glared at each other across the table. Then, unexpectedly, Hank chuckled. She's got spine. Mackenzie, give her that. James's anger deflated. He rubbed his face tiredly. Even with washing, mending, it won't be enough. Not in 2 weeks. That night, Eleanor lay awake thinking. In Boston, $200 had been nothing, the cost of a single gown. Here, it might mean the difference between keeping their home and losing everything. The irony wasn't lost on her. When James climbed into bed, she spoke into the darkness. There might be another way. What? In my trunk, the blue silk ball gown. It's worth at least $100, maybe more. If we could get it to Denver, find a buyer. That's a week's travel in good weather. Impossible now. The stage runs to Cheyenne. From there, Eleanor. His voice was gentle. Even if we could, I won't take your things. That dress, it's from your old life. You might need it someday. For what? The next barn dance? She turned to face his silhouette. James, that life is gone. This is my life now. Our life. Let me help save it. He was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, you'd really do that? Give up the last fancy thing you own? It's just fabric, she said. This, the ranch, the work we're building, this is real. In the darkness, his hand found hers. Calloused fingers intertwined with hers. A connection more intimate than any they'd shared. We'll find another way, he said. But thank you. They fell asleep that way. Hands clasped across the space between them, while outside the wind whispered of winter storms yet to come and challenges that would test them both. The mortgage deadline loomed like a gathering storm. But for now, in the darkness of their small cabin, they were no longer quite so alone in facing it. The morning after their conversation about the mortgage, Eleanor woke to find James already gone. Through the frost-covered window, she could see him in the corral with Hank, examining the horses with unusual intensity. Her heart sank. Was he considering selling Dulcie, despite her condition? At breakfast, Mrs. Novak was unusually talkative. I remember when Mr. James first come here, she said, kneading bread with fierce energy. Just boy, really, 22 years old, full of dreams, worked like 3 men to build this place. Where did he come from? Eleanor asked, realizing how little she knew of her husband's past. Pennsylvania. His family, they have farm there, but too many sons, not enough land. So he come west. The older woman's face softened. He and Mary, they meet in Cheyenne. She was working in her aunt's boarding house. Pretty girl, gentle, but... She shook her head. Not strong enough for this life? Eleanor absorbed this information. Another piece of the puzzle that was James Mackenzie. A younger son seeking his fortune, building something from nothing, only to lose what mattered most. Mrs. Novak, Eleanor said suddenly, when you first came here from the old country, how did you survive? The woman's hand stilled. Was hard, everything different, language, food, weather. Many times I want to give up, but... She shrugged. What else to do but keep going? Home was gone, only forward remained. Eleanor nodded, understanding perfectly. That afternoon, she made a decision. While the men were out checking the far pastures, she retrieved the silk ball gown from her trunk. The fabric shimmered in the dim light, incongruously beautiful in the rough cabin. She laid it out on the table, then found Mrs. Novak's sewing scissors. What you do? The housekeeper had returned, arms full of firewood, making something useful from something useless. Eleanor replied, beginning to cut. Mrs. Novak watched in amazement as Eleanor's educated hands, she had learned fine needlework as part of her ladylike accomplishments, transformed the expensive silk. By evening, she had created several items, decorative pillows, a table runner, and had begun work on an elaborate christening gown. When James entered for supper, he stopped short at the sight of the silk pieces. "Eleanor, what? The stage comes through tomorrow," she said calmly. "There's a store in Cheyenne that sells fine goods to officers' wives at Fort Russell. These pieces will fetch good money. Maybe not $100, but something." I told you I wouldn't take—" "You're not taking anything," Eleanor interrupted. "I'm investing in our ranch. There's a difference." They faced each other across the table spread with silk fragments. Finally, James picked up one of the pillows, examining her tiny, perfect stitches. "You did all this today?" "I had good teachers in Boston. Finally, something from that life proves useful." Hank entered, stopped at the sight. "Well, I'll be damned. Begging your pardon, ma'am." That evening, the mood lifted slightly. Even James seemed less burdened, though Eleanor caught him watching her with that unreadable expression. As she worked on the christening gown by lamplight, he suddenly spoke. "Why did you really leave Boston?" The question hung in the air. Eleanor's needle paused. "I told you, the marriage my parents arranged. There's more," he said quietly. "A woman doesn't travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger just to avoid an unpleasant marriage. Not a woman with your courage." Eleanor set down her sewing. In the lamplight, shadows played across James's weathered features. He had shared his pain about Mary. Perhaps it was time she shared hers. "Cornelius Ashford, the man they wanted me to marry, She struggled for words. "He saw women as possessions, pretty things to own and display. He made it very clear that once we were married, I would have no say in anything. Not where we lived, not how I spent my time, not even—" She flushed but continued. "Not even regarding children. He already had 3 daughters from his first marriage. He wanted sons and stated plainly that providing them would be my only purpose." James's jaw tightened. "And your parents agreed to this?" "My father had debts, gambling. Ashford's money would save the family reputation." Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "I was the price of their salvation." "So you ran." "So I ran." She agreed. "To a stranger who at least promised respect and partnership. Even if—" She gestured at the space between them. "Even if we're still strangers in many ways." James stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "We won't be able to save the ranch." The change of subject was jarring, but Eleanor recognized deflection when she saw it. "We don't know that yet." "I do." His voice was flat. "Did the calculations today. Even selling half the horses, your silk work, everyone's savings, will be $50 short, maybe more. Morrison knows it. He's probably already drawing up papers to take over." Eleanor rose, moving to stand beside him. Outside, stars glittered in the clear winter sky. "Then we'll start over somewhere else." He turned to her, startled. "You do that? Leave?" "I already left everything once," she said simply. "At least this time, I wouldn't be alone." Something shifted in his expression. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he turned back to the window. "I failed Mary. Looks like I'll fail you too." "James Mackenzie," Eleanor said sharply. "I did not travel 2,000 miles to marry a quitter. We have 10 days. A lot can happen in 10 days. The next morning brought unexpected hope. Tom Bannister arrived with news that a cavalry unit from Fort Russell was looking for remounts. Good horses for patrol work. "They're paying top dollar," Tom said. $40 a head for sound animals. James had 3 horses that might qualify, but they needed work, training to accept military saddles and equipment. For the next week, Eleanor watched her husband transform from defeated man to determined trainer. He worked from dawn to past dusk, patient with the horses even when exhaustion made his hands shake. Eleanor did her part, taking her silk creations to town with Miguel. The store owner's wife exclaimed over the quality, buying everything and commissioning more. Between that and taking in mending from the fort, Eleanor managed to earn $30. 3 days before the deadline, they gathered in the kitchen to count their resources. The pile of bills and coins on the table looked pitifully small. $160, James said heavily, still 40 short. The horses? Eleanor asked. Army buyer comes tomorrow. If he takes all 3, that's enough. If not... That night, Eleanor found herself praying for the first time since leaving Boston. Not to the distant God of her childhood's formal religion, but to whatever forces watched over desperate people in hard places. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The army buyer, a Captain Harrison, arrived with 2 sergeants. Eleanor watched from the porch as James led out the horses, demonstrating their training, their soundness. The captain was thorough, checking teeth, hooves, wind. I'll take 2, he finally announced. The bay and the chestnut, the gray's got a slight weakness in the right forelock. 35 each. Eleanor's heart sank. $70 would help, but they'd still be short. She saw James's shoulders drop slightly, though he kept his voice steady. Fair enough, Captain. As the soldiers prepared to leave with their purchases, Eleanor made a desperate decision. She hurried to the barn, returning with Dulce. What about a breeding mare? She called out. James spun around. Eleanor. No, Captain, she continued, ignoring her husband. This mare is in foal to excellent bloodstock. She's gentle, sound, and proven. Captain Harrison examined Dulce with interest. She is quality, he admitted, but we don't usually buy breeding stock. Think of it as an investment. Eleanor pressed. 1 mare, but in spring. 2 horses. The foal will have military training from birth if you want. The captain considered. Behind him, one of the sergeants murmured something about the regiment needing to improve their bloodlines. $40, the captain offered. 50, Eleanor countered. She's worth twice that, and you know it. Eleanor, James's voice was tight with pain. Don't do this. She turned to him, eyes blazing. We need $50. This gets us $50. She's yours, James said. I gave her to you, and I'm giving her to save our home. Eleanor replied. The captain looked between them. 45, final offer. Done, Eleanor said before James could protest. As they led Dulce away, Eleanor forced herself not to look back. She felt James's anger like heat at her back, but kept her spine straight until the soldiers were gone. How could you? James's voice was low, dangerous. You love that mare. I love this ranch more. Eleanor shot back. I love what we're building here, and I thought... Her voice broke slightly. I thought you were beginning to love it too. With me. She fled to the cabin before he could respond. Inside, Mrs. Novak took one look at her face and wrapped her in a rare embrace. You did right, the older woman murmured. Men, they don't always see. Their pride gets in the way. An hour later, Eleanor had composed herself enough to return to the kitchen. The money lay on the table, $205. Enough to pay Morrison and have $5 remaining. Victory had never tasted so bitter. James entered as she was storing the money in the cash box. He looked older, worn down by more than physical labor. Dulce was the first good thing I bought after... He stopped, started again. I bought her the week before Mary and I married. She said the mare's eyes were kind. James, you were right. He continued. I've been so busy protecting myself from more loss that I couldn't see what I was losing anyway. The ranch, yes, but more than that. He met her eyes. You came here expecting a partner. All I gave you was a stranger who happened to share your bed. Eleanor's breath caught. In all their months together, it was the most vulnerable she'd seen him. We saved the ranch, she said softly. We can work on the rest. He crossed to her then, movements uncertain, slowly, as if she might bolt. He reached out and touched her face. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I'm sorry about Dulce, he said. And I'm sorry for being a coward, for letting fear keep us strangers. We're not strangers, Eleanor whispered. Not anymore. He kissed her then, their first real kiss since their perfunctory wedding ceremony. It was careful, almost hesitant, but genuine. a promise of possibilities rather than passion. When they drew apart, both seemed surprised by what had happened. "I should—" James gestured vaguely toward the door. "Need to check the barn." Eleanor smiled slightly. "The barn can wait an hour. Sit with me. Tell me about Dulcie. Tell me about your family in Pennsylvania. Tell me anything." So they sat by the fire as the winter afternoon faded, and James began to talk about growing up as the third son with no inheritance waiting, about coming west with grand dreams, about meeting Mary and thinking he could build a perfect life through sheer will. "I thought if I worked hard enough, I could control everything," he admitted. "Keep everyone safe. When I couldn't," he shrugged, "I decided it was better not to try." "And now?" Eleanor asked. "Now I have a wife who sells her last beautiful thing and her favorite horse to save a ranch she's known for just months." His smile was rueful. Makes a man reconsider his assumptions. That evening, when they climbed to the loft, the careful distance they'd maintained for so long seemed to have dissolved. They lay close, not quite touching but no longer rigidly apart. "Tomorrow we pay Morrison," James said into the darkness. "Yes. And then," Eleanor considered, "then we start building again. Spring will come. We'll plant crops, raise cattle, maybe get another horse. We'll visit the Bannisters. I'll keep learning to cook without burning things. You'll teach me to ride properly." She paused. "We'll learn to be married." James's hand found hers in the darkness. "That sounds like a good plan." Outside, wind rattled the windows. Not a blizzard this time, just winter reminding them of its presence. But inside the cabin was warm, and for the first time since stepping off the train in Miles City, Eleanor felt truly home. The mortgage crisis had tested them. Stripping away pretenses and forcing honesty, they had passed the test, though not without scars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Frontier life guaranteed that, but tonight, they were no longer two strangers bound by necessity. They were partners, beginning to choose each other rather than simply accept what fate had delivered. Spring came slowly to Montana, teasing with warm days followed by sudden freezes. Eleanor had learned to read the signs now, the way the cattle grew restless, how the mountains shed their snowcaps gradually, revealing the dark rock beneath. She and James had found a rhythm through the winter, their partnership deepening with each shared challenge. The afternoon it all changed, started peacefully. Eleanor was working in the garden, coaxing early vegetables from the soil that had finally thawed. James had ridden out with Hank to check the far pastures, leaving Miguel to tend the horses. Mrs. Novak hummed in the kitchen, her steady presence a comfort. Eleanor heard the horses before she saw them, thundering hoofbeats too fast, too many for their own riders returning. She straightened, shading her eyes against the spring sun. 5 riders crested the hill, moving with the purposeful speed of men on dark business. "Mrs. Novak," Eleanor called, already moving toward the cabin. "Riders coming." The older woman appeared at the door, took one look, and disappeared back inside. Eleanor heard the distinctive sound of their rifle being taken from its place above the mantel. The riders thundered into the yard, pulling up in a cloud of dust. Their leader, a lean man with cold gray eyes and a scar across his left cheek, dismounted slowly. The others remained on horseback, hands resting casually near their guns. "Afternoon, ma'am," the scarred man said, touching his hat brim in a mockery of politeness. "Name's Jake Thornton. Looking for James Mackenzie." "He's not here," Eleanor replied steadily, though her heart raced. Something about these men raised every instinct of danger. "That's unfortunate," Thornton said. "We have business with him, old business." "Perhaps you could return another time," Eleanor suggested, "or leave a message." Thornton smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I think we'll wait. Boys, why don't you water the horses? I'm sure Mrs. Mackenzie won't mind." The men dismounted without waiting for permission, spreading across the yard with the casual arrogance of those accustomed to taking what they wanted. Eleanor stood her ground, though fear crawled up her spine. "Mr. Thornton," she said firmly, "I must ask you to leave. You can speak with my husband in town if you have legitimate business." "Legitimate?" Thornton laughed. "Hear that, boys? The lady thinks we're not legitimate." His humor vanished abruptly. "Your husband owes me a debt, Mrs. Mackenzie, a blood debt." Before Eleanor could respond, Miguel emerged from the barn, took in the scene, and started running toward the north pasture where James had gone. One of Thornton's men raised his rifle. "No!" Eleanor threw herself forward, but Thornton caught her arm in an iron grip. "Let the boy go," he said to his man. "Want Mackenzie to know we're here." He turned back to Eleanor, still holding her arm. "Pretty thing, aren't you? Mackenzie always did have good taste. First Mary, now you." Eleanor went cold. "You knew Mary?" "Knew her." Thornton's grip tightened painfully. "She was my sister." The world seemed to tilt. Eleanor stared at the scarred man, trying to see any resemblance to the gentle woman James had described. Half-sister, technically. Thornton continued. "Different fathers. She was the good one, the one who got away from our family's ways, thought she was too good for us once she married Mackenzie." His voice hardened. "Then she died because he left her alone." "It was a storm," Eleanor said. "A terrible accident." "Was it?" Thornton released her arm so suddenly she stumbled. "Or was it a man who didn't protect what was his, who was too busy building his empire to keep his family safe?" Mrs. Novak appeared on the porch, rifle in her hands. "You leave now," she commanded, "or I shoot." Thornton's men tensed, but he waved them back. "Easy, old woman. We're just talking, having a civilized conversation about family debts." "Please," Eleanor said. "Whatever you think happened, violence won't bring Mary back." "No," Thornton agreed. "But justice might ease the sting." He looked around the ranch with calculating eyes. "Nice spread. Be a shame if something happened to it. Fire spreads quick in dry spring weather." The threat was clear. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to find a way to defuse the situation. Where was James? How long before Miguel reached him? "What do you want?" she asked directly. "Smart woman." Thornton smiled again. "Simple enough. Mackenzie took what was mine, my sister's life. Traditional justice says a life for a life, but I'm a reasonable man. I'll settle for everything else. This ranch, the cattle, every penny he has. He can ride out with the clothes on his back, and we'll call it even." "That's not justice," Eleanor protested. "That's theft. Matter of perspective." Thornton shrugged. Then his eyes sharpened, looking past her. "And here comes the man himself." Eleanor turned to see James riding hard toward them, Hank and Miguel flanking him. Her relief at seeing him was immediately tempered by fear, 3 men against 5. And Thornton's crew had the look of experienced gunmen. James dismounted before his horse fully stopped, his face carved from stone. "Jake," he said flatly, "thought you were in prison. Got out early. Good behavior." Thornton's laugh was ugly. "Imagine my surprise, coming home to find my sister dead and buried, and you with a new wife already." "Eleanor, get inside," James said without looking at her. "She stays." Thornton countered. "She should hear this. Know what kind of man she married?" James's hand hovered near his gun. "Your quarrel is with me. Leave her out of it. Like you left Mary out of it." Thornton's voice rose. "She wrote me, you know, in prison. Told me how lonely she was, how the isolation was killing her slowly. But she stayed because she loved you." Eleanor saw James flinch as if struck. Behind them, she noticed Hank quietly positioning himself, Miguel doing the same. The yard had become a powder keg waiting for a spark. "I loved Mary," James said quietly. "Her death near destroyed me." "Near isn't enough," Thornton snarled. "You should have died instead of her." "Jake, please!" A new voice interrupted. One of Thornton's men, younger than the others, pushed forward. "This isn't what Mary would want." "Shut up, Will!" Thornton snapped, but the young man persisted. "I remember Mary," Will said. Remember how she talked about forgiveness, about leaving the family's violent ways behind? You think she'd want this? Us threatening her husband? Eleanor seized the opening. Your sister sounds like she was a remarkable woman, someone who chose love over violence. Would you honor her memory by becoming everything she tried to escape? Thornton's face contorted. For a moment, she thought he might draw his gun. Then something seemed to break in him. She was 8 years old when our father died, he said, his voice suddenly hoarse. I was 16, already running with bad crowds, but Mary, she used to follow me everywhere, convinced I'd be a hero someday. He laughed bitterly. Instead, I became exactly what our father was, a violent man who solved problems with his gun. The tension in the yard shifted, though didn't dissipate. Eleanor carefully moved closer to James, who caught her hand briefly, a warning or reassurance. She wasn't sure which. When she wrote that, she'd found someone good, Thornton continued. Someone who'd give her the peaceful life she dreamed of. I was glad, even in prison. It comforted me knowing she was safe. His eyes hardened again. Then I get out and find she died alone in a blizzard, trying to save animals because her husband was gone. If I could trade places with her, I would, James said. Not a day passes I don't wish it. Wishing doesn't change anything, Thornton replied. But maybe. He looked around again, this time seeing more than just property. Maybe there's another way. Eleanor held her breath. The young man, Will, pressed forward again. Jake, remember what Mary wrote about forgiveness? How she said holding on to hate was like drinking poison. I remember everything she wrote, Thornton said sharply. Then, more quietly, I remember. The standoff stretched taut. Misses. Novak still held the rifle steady on the porch. Hank and Miguel waited for James's signal. The afternoon sun beat down on them all, casting long shadows across the dusty yard. Finally, Thornton spoke. There's a way to settle this without blood. Old way, but legal. Single combat. You and me, Mackenzie. Fists, not guns. You win. I ride away and never come back. I win. You sign over the ranch and leave Montana forever. No, Eleanor said immediately. James, you can't. Done, James said, already removing his gun belt. James! Eleanor gripped his arm. This is insane. We'll get the sheriff. Handle this legally. There is no legal, James said gently. Not out here. Not for this. He handed his gun to Hank. This is between Jake and me. Been coming for 3 years. The men cleared a rough circle in the yard. Thornton's crew dismounted, forming one side. The ranch hands stood opposite. Eleanor found herself between misses, Novak and young Will, who gave her a sympathetic look. Jake's not a bad man, Will said quietly. Just a broken one. Mary's death, coming so soon after he got out, it twisted something in him. Eleanor watched as the two men faced each other. James was taller, broader, but Thornton had a lean, dangerous quality. They circled warily. Then Thornton struck, fast as a snake, his fist catching James's jaw. What followed was brutal. This wasn't the gentlemanly boxing Eleanor had glimpsed in Boston. This was raw, savage combat between two men carrying years of pain and guilt. They grappled in the dust, trading devastating blows. Blood flowed from split lips and cut brows. Eleanor wanted to look away, but forced herself to watch. This was part of James's past, part of the grief he'd carried silently. To turn away would be to abandon him to it alone. The fight raged on. James's superior strength showed, but Thornton fought with desperate fury. They crashed into the corral fence, splintering wood. Thornton got James down, hands around his throat. Eleanor started forward, but Will caught her arm. No interference, he said. That breaks the code. James managed to throw Thornton off. Both men staggering upright. They were exhausted now, movement sluggish, but neither would yield. Then James caught Thornton with a powerful uppercut that sent him sprawling. Thornton tried to rise, fell back, tried again, managed to get to his knees. Blood dripped steadily from his nose. Yield, James gasped, swaying on his feet. Never, Thornton spat blood. "Not till you pay for Mary. Then you'll die holding on to hate," James said. "And Mary will have lost both men she loved to meaningless violence." Something in those words penetrated. Thornton's face crumpled. Suddenly, he wasn't a dangerous gunman, but a grieving brother. "She's gone," he said brokenly. "My little sister is gone, and I wasn't there. Couldn't protect her." "Neither could I," James said quietly. He dropped to his knees beside Thornton, exhausted. "We both failed her, but this isn't what she'd want." The two men knelt in the dust, united in their grief, if nothing else. Eleanor moved forward then, ignoring Will's attempt to stop her. She knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on each man's shoulder. "Mary sounds like she was full of love," she said softly. "Maybe the way to honor her isn't through more violence, but through the forgiveness she believed in." Thornton looked up at her, and she saw the lost boy he must have been once. "You don't understand. The things I've done. I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe that's not for you to decide," Eleanor said. "Maybe it's a gift you accept, not something you earn." The yard was silent except for the wind and the distant cry of a hawk. Then Thornton did something that shocked everyone. He began to cry. Great, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from his very soul. James, battered and bloodied, reached out awkwardly and gripped Thornton's shoulder. Two men who moments before had been trying to kill each other, now bound by shared loss. When the storm of grief passed, Thornton stood slowly. His men tensed, but he waved them back. "We're done here," he said hoarsely. "Will was right. Mary wouldn't want this." He looked at James. "I can't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I won't seek revenge either. She wouldn't want that staining her memory." James nodded, struggling to his feet. Eleanor slipped under his arm, supporting him. "If you ever need anything," James said, "the door's open. Mary would want that too." Thornton almost smiled. "You married well this time. Mackenzie, this one's got steel in her spine." To Eleanor, he added, "Take care of him. He's a good man who made a terrible mistake. Don't let him drown in it." They mounted up and rode away, leaving dust and a strange sense of catharsis behind. As soon as they were gone, James's legs gave out. Eleanor and Hank half carried him to the cabin. As Eleanor tended James's injuries, split lip, blackened eye, possibly cracked ribs, she felt the last walls between them crumble. He caught her hand as she dabbed at a cut. "You could have been hurt," he said. "When you stepped between us—" "We're partners," Eleanor said firmly. "Your fights are my fights. Your grief is my grief." She paused. "And hopefully, someday, your joy is my joy." James pulled her down and kissed her, mindful of his split lip. It was different from their first tentative kiss. This held promise and passion equally. "It already is," he murmured against her mouth. "You brought joy back into this place, into me." That night, as they lay carefully arranged to avoid pressing James's injuries, Eleanor felt a profound shift. The shadows of the past weren't gone. They might never fully disappear, but they no longer stood between them like a wall. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said into the darkness. "Tell me about Mary, the happy memories." And so James did, his voice soft with remembered affection rather than guilt. He spoke of their meeting, their courtship, the dreams they'd shared, and Eleanor listened, understanding that to love James fully meant accepting all of him, including his love for the woman who came before. When he finally fell silent, Eleanor spoke. "She sounds wonderful. I wish I could have known her." You would have liked each other," James said. "Both strong women who saw something worth saving in a stubborn rancher." He paused. "Eleanor? Yes? Thank you, for today, for everything." She found his hand in the darkness, intertwining their fingers. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" "Yes," he said with quiet certainty. "We are." Outside, spring continued its patient work of renewal. The confrontation with Thornton had lanced old wounds, letting poison drain away. What remained was painful but clean. The honest ache of loss rather than the festering of guilt. They had survived winter, financial crisis, and now the violent echoes of the past. Each trial had worn away pretense and distance, leaving something stronger in its place. Eleanor thought of the frightened girl who'd stepped off the train in Miles City months ago, barely recognizing her in the woman she'd become. The ranch would face more challenges: drought, storms, the uncertainties of frontier life. But they would face them together, no longer strangers bound by necessity, but partners bound by choice and growing love. The mail-order bride had found her place, and the bitter rancher had found his way back to hope. It wasn't the life either had imagined, but it was theirs, built from courage, compromise, and the daily decision to keep trying. In the Montana darkness, under stars that watched over all human struggles with ancient indifference, two people held tight to each other and to the future they were building, one difficult day at a time. The healing between Eleanor and James deepened with each passing week. Spring blossomed fully across the Montana landscape, painting the hills with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of new grass. The ranch thrived under their joint care. Calves grew strong. The garden burst with vegetables, and the small remuda of horses expanded with careful purchases. One golden afternoon, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard the distant sound of many horses. She shaded her eyes, watching as James and Miguel drove in a small herd of wild mustangs they'd been tracking for days. "Got them!" Miguel shouted triumphantly as they guided the horses into the reinforced corral. Eleanor hurried over, admiring the animals, lean and wild-eyed, coats gleaming with health. Among them was a young mare, her coat the color of honey, who stood slightly apart from the others. "That one's special," James said, dismounting beside Eleanor. "Smart. See how she's already looking for weaknesses in the fence? She'll either be the best horse we've ever trained or the most trouble." "Maybe both," Eleanor said, studying the mare's intelligent eyes. "What will you call her?" James smiled, an expression that came more easily to him now. "Thought you might want to name her. Consider her yours, if you can gentle her." Eleanor's breath caught. After sacrificing Dulce to save the ranch, she hadn't expected another horse so soon. "James, we can't afford—" "We can," he said firmly. "Ranch is doing well. Besides," his voice softened, "a horsewoman needs a horse." She kissed him there in the yard, not caring that Miguel whooped or that Hank chuckled from the barn doorway. When they parted, James's eyes held warmth that chased away the last shadows of winter. "I'll call her Hope," Eleanor decided, watching the mare pace the corral. "She looks like a hope." Over the following days, Eleanor spent hours with the mare, using techniques Miguel and James taught her combined with her own gentle intuition. Hope proved both challenging and rewarding, intelligent enough to test every boundary, but responding to patience and consistency. It was during one of these training sessions that Sarah Bannister arrived, driving her wagon at a pace that suggested urgency. "Eleanor," she called. "Thank goodness you're here. I need help." Eleanor quickly tied Hope and hurried over. "What's wrong?" "It's Alice," Sarah said, referring to her youngest sister. "She's with child and having a difficult time. The doctor's in Billings for the week. Ruth's with her, but we need every hand we can get." "Will you come?" "Of course," Eleanor said immediately. She'd grown close to the Bannister sisters over the months, their friendship one of the unexpected gifts of her new life. She found James in the north pasture and explained. His face grew concerned. "Take Mrs. Novak," he said. "She's delivered more babies than any doctor. I'll manage here." Within an hour, Eleanor and Mrs. Novak were in Sarah's wagon, medical supplies packed carefully. The 5-mile journey to the Double B Ranch seemed endless. Sarah filling them in on Alice's condition. Early labor, bleeding, the baby positioned wrong. They found the Bannister house in controlled chaos. Ruth met them at the door, relief flooding her face. "Thank God. She's asking for you. Eleanor says you bring her calm." Eleanor had never attended a birth, but she pushed down her nervousness. In the bedroom, Alice lay pale and frightened, her husband Ben pacing helplessly nearby. "Eleanor," Alice gasped, reaching out. "I'm scared." "You're going to be fine," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt, taking Alice's hand. "Mrs. Novak has done this countless times." The older woman was already examining Alice with gentle, experienced hands. Her expression remained neutral, but Eleanor caught the concern in her eyes. "Baby is turned, Mrs." Novak announced. "Must fix position. Will hurt." What followed were some of the longest hours of Eleanor's life. She held Alice's hands through the pain, wiped her brow, offered sips of water and constant encouragement. "Mrs." Novak worked with steady determination, occasionally barking orders that Eleanor and the sisters hurried to follow. Outside, a summer storm rolled in, thunder shaking the house and rain lashing the windows. It seemed fitting, life fighting to enter the world while nature raged outside. "I can't," Alice sobbed after a particularly hard contraction. "It's too much." "You can," Eleanor said firmly. "You're the woman who rode out a blizzard to save your cattle last winter, who broke her arm breaking a horse and said it herself because the doctor was drunk. You're the strongest person I know." Alice managed a weak laugh. "That was different." "No," Eleanor said. "It's all courage, and you have more than anyone." As night deepened, "Mrs." Novak finally announced. "Baby comes now. Push with next pain." Eleanor had never seen anything like the miracle that followed. Through Alice's efforts and anguish came new life. A tiny, perfect daughter who announced her arrival with lusty cries that drowned out the thunder. "A girl." "Mrs." Novak said with satisfaction, cleaning the baby efficiently. Small but strong. Eleanor helped Alice hold her daughter for the first time, tears streaming down all their faces. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around Alice's thumb with surprising strength. "What will you name her?" Ruth asked. Alice looked at Eleanor. "Eleanor Mary," she said, "after the two strongest women I know, if that's acceptable." Eleanor couldn't speak through her tears, only nodded. She thought of Mary Mackenzie, whom she'd never met but whose memory had shaped so much of her life. Now that name would go forward into the future, carried by this new life. They stayed until dawn, ensuring both mother and baby were stable, as Eleanor and Mrs. Novak rode home in the banister wagon, Sarah insisting on driving them. Eleanor felt profoundly changed by the experience. "You did good," Mrs. Novak said as the ranch came into view. "Not everyone can stay calm in birth room. I was terrified." Eleanor admitted, "Yes, but you didn't show. That is strength." The older woman paused. "You will be good mother someday." Eleanor's hand went unconsciously to her stomach. She'd been feeling unwell lately, tired and queasy in the mornings. She'd attributed it to the hard work of summer. But now, James met them at the wagon, relief clear on his face. "Is Alice?" "Mother and daughter are perfect," Eleanor assured him. "A little girl. They named her Eleanor Mary." Something passed over James's face at Mary's name, but it was peaceful rather than pained. That's good. Mary would have liked that." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, Eleanor gathered her courage. "James," she began, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think so. I think," she took a breath, "I think I'm with child." The expression on his face was worth all her nervousness, shock melting into wonder, then joy so profound it transformed him. We're... He couldn't seem to form complete sentences. "I'm not certain," Eleanor said quickly, "but I've missed my courses, and the sickness in the mornings." James pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "You're happy?" Eleanor asked, though the answer was obvious. "Happy?" He pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Eleanor, you've given me everything. A reason to live again, a partner, a future, and now a family." They sat together as stars emerged in the clear Montana sky, planning and dreaming. Would it be a boy or girl? Would they have James's steady strength or Eleanor's determined spirit? Or perhaps, hopefully, both. "We'll need to add on to the cabin," James said practically. "Can't raise a baby in that loft." "And I'll need to learn so much," Eleanor added. "Thank goodness for Mrs. Novak and the Bannister sisters." James said, "Little Eleanor Mary will need a playmate." The easy way he spoke of the future, of community and continuation, showed how far they'd traveled from those first awkward days. The isolated, bitter man and the desperate runaway bride had become something neither expected: a family. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Hank rode in from town with news that made Eleanor's heart skip. "Letter for you, Mrs. Mackenzie," he said, handing over an envelope. "Postmaster said it came on yesterday's stage." Eleanor recognized Charlotte's handwriting immediately. She'd written her sister several times. Careful letters that gave no clear location, but this was the first response. With trembling hands, she opened it. "Dearest E," it began, using the nickname only Charlotte knew. "Your letters have been my salvation. Mother and father believe you dead. They held a memorial service last month. I alone know the truth and guard it carefully. Cornelius Ashford married the Pemberton girl 6 months ago. She looks miserable already. You escaped a terrible fate. I pray you found the happiness you sought. All my love. C." "Good news?" James asked gently, seeing her tears. "The best," Eleanor said. "I'm officially dead to my old life. There's no going back now." "Do you want to? Go back?" Eleanor looked around. At the cabin they'd improved together. The thriving garden. Hope grazing in the pasture. This man who'd become her whole world. "Never," she said firmly. "This is my life. Our life. That Sunday, they made the trip to town for supplies." Word had already spread about the expected baby. Frontier telegraph being faster than any wire service. The same people who'd once whispered about the mail-order bride's chances now offered congratulations and advice. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson pressed a package into Eleanor's hands. "Baby blanket," she said gruffly. "Made it for my grandson, but he won't need 2. Outside the church, the minister's wife offered her collection of baby clothes. Outgrown but still serviceable. No sense in waste. Even Morrison at the bank, who'd nearly foreclosed on them, managed a tight smile. "Here congratulations are in order. Mackenzie, children are the future of this territory." As they rode home, wagon loaded with supplies and unexpected gifts, Eleanor marveled at the transformation. She'd earned her place in this community through sweat and determination. The mail-order bride who wouldn't last the winter had become one of them. "Happy?" James asked, noting her smile. "More than I ever dreamed possible." Eleanor answered. That evening, as they unloaded the wagon, Jake Thornton rode into their yard. Eleanor tensed, but James placed a calming hand on her arm. "Jake," he said evenly, "what brings you here?" Thornton dismounted slowly. He looked different, cleaner, his eyes clearer than during their violent confrontation months ago. "Heard you were expecting," he said awkwardly. "Wanted to offer congratulations?" "Thank you," Eleanor said, sensing how much this cost him. Thornton shifted uncomfortably. "Also wanted you to know I'm leaving Montana. Got work on a ranch in Wyoming. Figured it was time for a fresh start." "We wish you well," James said sincerely. Thornton nodded, started to remount, then paused. Mary would have been happy about the baby. She always wanted children. His voice roughened. "I'm glad you found happiness again. Mackenzie, both of you." He rode away without looking back, and Eleanor felt another ghost laid peacefully to rest. The past would always be part of their story, but it no longer held them captive. As summer evenings settled over the ranch, Eleanor stood with James watching Hope and the other horses grazing peacefully. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, imagining the life growing within. Soon there would be a child playing in this yard, learning to ride these horses, growing up under this vast sky. "Do you ever miss it?" James asked quietly. "The life you had before?" Eleanor considered. "I miss Charlotte. But the rest? The parties, the rules, the emptiness of it all? Never." She turned to face him. "Do you still see her sometimes? Mary, when you look at me?" James pulled her close. "No, you're nothing alike, and that's as it should be. She was my past. You're my present and future. You and this little one." The mail-order bride who'd fled her gilded cage had found something better than escape. She'd found home, love, and purpose in a harsh land that demanded everything but gave back in equal measure. The handsome rancher who'd been nothing like she expected had become everything she needed. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. It always did on the frontier. But tonight, they were complete. Their small family beginning its next chapter under the endless Montana sky. The girl from Boston and the wounded rancher had saved each other, and in doing so, had built something worth saving. Autumn arrived with a vengeance that year, bringing early frost and rumors of conflict between the big cattle operations and smaller ranchers like James. Eleanor, now visibly pregnant, watched with growing concern as riders passed their ranch more frequently, faces grim with unspoken threats. The trouble crystallized on a crisp October morning when Carl Morrison arrived with two other men Eleanor didn't recognize. Unlike his previous visit demanding mortgage payment, this time the banker wore the satisfied smile of a man holding winning cards. "Mackenzie," Morrison called out, not bothering to dismount. "Got a proposition for you." James emerged from the barn, Hank and Miguel flanking him. Eleanor moved to the porch, one hand protectively over her swollen belly. "State your business, Morrison," James said evenly. "Simple enough. The Cattlemen's Association is consolidating operations. Small spreads like yours are inefficient. We're prepared to offer you a fair price for your land." "Not interested," James replied. Morrison's smile didn't waver. "You will be. See, the association controls water rights upstream now. Come spring, might find your creek running mighty low. Cattle need water. Mackenzie." Eleanor felt cold fury rise in her chest. After everything they'd survived, now this new threat emerged. "That's illegal," she called out. "Water rights are established by law." Morrison tipped his hat mockingly. "Laws change, Mrs. Mackenzie, especially when influential people want them changed. You'd be wise to consider our offer. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen." After they left, James's face was stone. "They mean to force us out, one way or another." "We won't let them," Eleanor said firmly. "We've come too far to give up now." That evening brought unexpected allies. Tom Bannister arrived with several other small ranchers, their faces set with determination. "They've approached all of us," Tom said, "trying to buy us out or squeeze us dry. But we figure if we stand together..." Thus began their resistance. The small ranchers formed an alliance, sharing resources and information. Eleanor, despite her advancing pregnancy, became their unofficial secretary, keeping records and coordinating efforts. Her education, once seeming useless on the frontier, proved invaluable in drafting legal documents and correspondence. The pressure intensified as winter approached. Fences were cut, allowing cattle to stray. Water holes were fouled. One night, shots were fired near the barn, though no one was hurt. "They're trying to scare us," James said, loading his rifle. "They're succeeding," Eleanor admitted, hand on her belly, but not enough to make us run. The baby seemed to sense the tension, kicking fiercely. Dr. Hawkins, who'd finally returned from Billings, warned Eleanor about strain. "You need rest," he said firmly. "This kind of stress isn't good for you or the child." But rest was impossible with their livelihood under siege. Eleanor continued working, though James and Mrs. Novak conspired to limit her activities. She found ways around their protections, understanding that this fight was for their child's future as much as their own. The conflict reached a head in early December. Morrison arrived with a larger group, including several hired guns, but this time, he found the yard full of armed ranchers. The alliance had gathered to make their stand. "You're trespassing, Morrison," James said, rifle steady in his hands. "Just came to make our final offer," Morrison replied, though his confidence seemed shaken by the united front. "Take it or leave it." "We'll leave it," Tom Bannister said. "And we've got something for you." He produced a sheaf of papers. Petitions to the territorial governor, signed by every small rancher and half the townspeople. Copies have already been sent. Your water rights grab won't stand legal scrutiny. Eleanor had spent weeks preparing those documents, despite barely being able to reach the desk over her belly. Watching Morrison's face purple with rage made every late night worthwhile. "You think papers matter out here?" Morrison snarled. "You think—" His threat was cut short by the arrival of an unexpected party. A U.S. Marshal with a small detachment of soldiers from Fort Russell. "Carl Morrison," the Marshal called out. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, intimidation, and violation of federal water rights law." The banker's men scattered, but Morrison himself was trapped. As the soldiers led him away, he shot venomous looks at the assembled ranchers. "This isn't over," he promised. "Yes," the marshal said firmly. "It is. The governor takes a dim view of big operations trying to force out legitimate settlers. You'll have plenty of time to think about that in federal prison." The crowd erupted in celebration, but Eleanor suddenly gripped James's arm. "The baby," she gasped. "I think it's time." What followed was controlled chaos. Mrs. Novak took charge, ordering everyone out except the Bannister sisters. James was banished to the porch with the other men, where they pretended not to hear Eleanor's cries from inside. "First babies take time," Tom assured James, though the younger man paced like a caged wolf. But this baby seemed eager to join the world. After only 6 hours, quick for a first birth. "Mrs." Novak said. A lusty cry announced the arrival of the newest Mackenzie. "A son," Ruth announced, appearing at the door with a wide smile. Healthy and loud. James nearly knocked her over in his rush to get inside. Eleanor, exhausted but radiant, held their son, a perfect tiny being with wisps of dark hair and his father's serious expression. "He's beautiful," James breathed, touching the baby's cheek with one finger. "What shall we call him?" Eleanor asked. James was quiet for a moment. "William," he said finally, "after my brother who died young. William James Mackenzie." "William," Eleanor agreed, then smiled. "Will Mackenzie. It suits him." As word spread, neighbors arrived with gifts and congratulations. The same community that had once doubted the mail-order bride now embraced her family fully. Even some who'd been neutral in the conflict with Morrison expressed support. "You stood up to them," Henderson from the trading post said gruffly. "Showed them we won't be pushed around. That took courage." That night, as Eleanor nursed little Will while James kept protective watch, she reflected on their journey. A year ago, she'd been a desperate woman fleeing an arranged marriage. Now she was a mother, a rancher's wife who'd helped save their community from powerful enemies. "No regrets?" James asked softly, echoing his question from months before. "Only one," Eleanor said, "that Charlotte can't meet her nephew." "Maybe someday," James said, "when Will's older, we could travel east, visit." Eleanor smiled at the thought, then winced as Will nursed enthusiastically. "He's got your appetite and your determination," James countered. "Lord help us." Winter passed peacefully, with Morrison imprisoned and his conspiracy exposed. The small ranchers were left alone. The alliance remained, neighbors helping each other through the cold months. Eleanor learned to balance motherhood with ranch work, often carrying Will in a sling while she tended chickens or worked in the kitchen. Spring brought new life to the ranch in many forms. Hope, now fully trained, proved to be everything James had predicted, the best mount Eleanor had ever ridden. Dulcie's sacrifice hadn't been forgotten, but Hope helped heal that wound. The mare seemed to understand Will was precious cargo, standing statue still when Eleanor mounted with the baby. Together they would ride the ranch boundaries, Eleanor pointing out landmarks to her son. "This is your land," she would whisper to him. "Your heritage." One perfect May afternoon, the Bannister sisters visited with little Eleanor Mary, now toddling on chubby legs. The children played on a blanket while the women talked and sewed. James and Tom discussed cattle prices and spring roundup plans. "Look at us," Sarah said suddenly. "Proper frontier families." "Who would have thought?" Eleanor thought. Alice said, bouncing her daughter. "From the moment she arrived, she was determined to belong here." "I was determined to survive," Eleanor corrected. Belonging came as a surprise. The best things usually do, Ruth observed. As the visitors prepared to leave, Tom pulled James aside for a private word. Eleanor, always alert to undercurrents, noticed James's expression shift from surprise to thoughtfulness. "What did Tom want?" she asked after they'd gone. "The territorial government is forming a new county," James said slowly. "They need a sheriff. Tom thinks I should consider it." Eleanor studied her husband. The position would bring steady income and respect, but also danger. "What do you think?" "I think," James said, lifting Will from his cradle, "that I want our son to grow up in a place where law means something, where men like Morrison can't intimidate families off their land." "Then you'll accept. We'll decide together," James said firmly. "It affects all of us." They discussed it over the following days, weighing risks against benefits. In the end, it was a simple question that decided Eleanor. "Can you make a difference?" she asked. "I believe so," James answered. "Then do it. We'll manage the ranch. We've proven we're stronger together than apart." The ceremony was held in town on a brilliant June day. Eleanor stood proudly with Will in her arms as James took the oath of office. The same people who'd whispered about the mail-order bride now applauded their new sheriff. Judge Patterson, who'd married them so unceremoniously, administered the oath with far more dignity. "You've come far, both of you," he said afterward. "That scared girl and bitter man I married are long gone." "Not gone," Eleanor corrected. "Transformed." As they rode home, James wearing his new badge, Eleanor reflected on the twists of fate that had brought them here. She'd fled a gilded cage seeking freedom and found so much more: love, purpose, community, family. "Penny for your thoughts," James said. Eleanor smiled, adjusting Will in his sling. "I was thinking about titles. Mail-order bride fled her gilded life to wed a handsome rancher. But he's nothing like she expected." James chuckled. "Sounds like one of those sensational newspaper stories." "Perhaps, but it's our story. And the ending." She looked at her husband, their son, the ranch spreading before them under the endless Montana sky. "The ending is better than any story could capture." "This isn't an ending," James said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "It's a beginning. Sheriff Mackenzie, his formerly Boston wife, and their son Will. Imagine the adventures ahead." Eleanor laughed, spurring hope to match James's pace. "Together? Always together," he confirmed. As they rode toward their ranch, their home, their future, the sun painted the grasslands gold. Cattle grazed peacefully. The garden needed weeding, fences wanted mending, and 1,000 daily challenges awaited. But they would meet them as they'd learned to meet everything, united, determined, and grateful for the unexpected gifts that came from taking desperate chances. The mail-order bride had found her happy ending. Though it looked nothing like the fairy tales of her youth, it was better, real, earned through struggle, and shared with a man who'd proven that sometimes the best partners are the ones who surprise us. In the vast wilderness of Montana territory, two lonely souls had built something worth fighting for: a family, a future, and a love strong enough to weather any storm. The screen fades to black as their silhouettes disappear into the golden sunset. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the Wild West. I hope Eleanor and James's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear from cowboys and cowgirls all around the world. Please drop a comment below and let me know what country or state you're in. If you enjoyed this tale of love, courage, and redemption on the frontier, please consider subscribing to the From Wild West channel for more authentic Western love stories. And I'd really love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite moment? Did you see that twist with Jake Thornton coming? Share your reactions in the comments below. Until we meet again on the dusty trails of another Western romance. Keep riding toward your own sunset. Happy trails, partners.